We're so glad to be having everybody here tonight to gather virtually. I know it's not ideal to be virtual, but here we are to celebrate the Zip Code Plays. Since the plays launched on November 12th, we've had more than 20,000 listens. More than 20,000 listens from 5 continents. It's great to expand our universe. People get to hear us from all over the world. The last few months have been really hard on all of us that we can't be at the theater, we can't be gathering with our friends and our Antaeus family. But if we hadn't closed our doors because of this pandemic, we wouldn't have come up with the idea of the Zip Code Plays, and we wouldn't have been able to create a whole new way to make art at Antaeus, which we're very excited about. They've been such a great success, and we wanted to share a little bit about a little bit more about them with our community. So tonight, you're going to hear from all 6 playwrights, all members of our Playwrights Lab, who've created these terrific stories, and they're inspired by different neighborhoods, different zip codes in Los Angeles. Phil?
Hi, welcome everybody. Before we get started, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that all of the plays in this series were written, recorded, and take place on land that is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. Now, all of you are here tonight with us by special invitation because we want to recognize everything that you do for this community. Thank you so much for being with us, even though we're all sheltering at home. Now, just a note about the evening, we're going to begin with a conversation between the playwrights, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. I'm going to read this part because it's confusing. You can use the question and answer section to send us a question, or hit the raise hand button and you'll be unmuted to ask your question out loud, but your camera will stay off. Okay. Also, please be aware that this event is being recorded so that we can share it on our website for future listeners of the Zip Code Plays to enjoy. Thank you.
Before we get started, I want to thank the donors who made this project possible. The Zip Code Plays series was generously supported in part by the Michael J. Connell Foundation, and the individual plays were also supported by Evie and John DiCiaccio, Ruth Elliott and Bill Cooney, the Peter Glenville Foundation, Mary Lambert in memory of Mark Lambert, Deborah Thompson and Lawrence Riff, and Belinda and Jack Walker. We're so grateful to them and to all of our donors for helping us undertake such an exciting and creative project like this during such a challenging time. Okay, let's get started. I want to introduce playwright Alex Goldberg, who wrote 90272, Annexing the Palisades. In addition to being a wonderful playwright, Alex is also a great moderator for these types of conversations. So he's going to be leading us tonight. Alex has been a member of the Antaeus Playwrights Lab since 2015. He's been the writer and/or director of 3 feature films, including the multi-award-winning Closure. He's a 2-time O'Neill Conference semifinalist and a 1-time finalist. He's had 15 plays that have been produced across the country and on 3 continents. So I'm going to start the evening off. Is Alex here with us yet? Not yet. Let's give him a minute. I want to ask him a question, put him on the spot.
Let's see. Sorry, I've hit promote to panelist a couple of times, and it seems to be taking a moment.
It's not easy to become a panelist. It's not easy. You've got to be promoted.
You have to have a lot of a very long resume. There he is. Hi, Alex. Welcome. Welcome.
Hi. Hi.
So I'm gonna kick it off by asking, what zip code are you coming to us from tonight?
I am in 91506 Burbank. That's where I am right now. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm honored. And by here, I mean in my house, like you all are. Great. So I will go ahead and bring out our other writers, and they can join. I'll intro them all, and then they can join us. And then I have some questions for each of us about the process. And then, as they said before, we'll be opening it up to everyone else. So first up, and I'm going in order of how these were released, he's the author of Speakeasy, which is set in 90011 South Central Los Angeles. He is a Howard University alumnus with an MFA in film from Columbia University. His plays have been workshopped or had readings with Moving Arts, Chalk Rep, Circle X, and the Washington, D.C. Black Theater Festival. He is a McDowell Colony Fellow in Playwriting and an O'Neill National Playwrights Conference semifinalist. He's also a coach for the Speak Up program, which assists the formerly homeless in telling their stories. And he's calling in right now from zip code 90068, which is just outside of Studio City. Please welcome Kari Wyatt. And as Kari's coming in, there he is.
How are you?
How are you? Good, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Awesome. Next up, let's bring in the author of Plucker, which is set in 90403 Santa Monica. This writer is a former New York City investment analyst, a DC policy writer, an international aid director, and a touring dancer. She's also written for 7 television shows. She's a first-generation South Asian American, and she's coming in all the way across the country from zip code 22182, my old stomping grounds of Vienna, Virginia. Please welcome Naina Agrawal. Hi, Naina.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
All right. Next up, joining us, she's the writer of All Information Herein is Classified, which is set in 90024 Westwood. Her full-length plays include the Super Variety Match bonus round, The Escape Thingy, and Miss Keller Has No Second Book. Her short comedy film Gratitude Jar Time Capsule was an official selection in the Pittsburgh Shorts Film Festival and the Atlantic Comedy Film Festival. She's also an actor, and she's appeared in all of my favorite TV shows, which include, but not limited to, The Good Place, Barry, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Veep, Baskets, Arrested Development, and so many more. She's also a regular panelist on the NPR comedy quiz show Says You. And here's Deb Height coming in from 90036 Mid-City. Hi, Deb.
Hello, hello. It's a
Welcome.
Miracle every time this works. I tell you, it's
I
like
know.
amazing.
They're going to kick one of us out when I introduce the next person. We'll see what happens.
That's appropriate.
Yeah, sure. So next up is the writer Salvage, which is set in 91352 Sun Valley. He hails from the other LA, as in Louisiana, Baton Rouge. He trained in New York at NYU, the Tisch School of Dramatic Writing program. He's been produced playwright in Chicago, New York, New Orleans, London, and here in LA by the Moving Arts Theater at LACMA and EST LA. And his web series, Before We Go to Sleep, has been in various festivals as well as on Sky 203 in England. He is calling in from zip code 90027, East Hollywood, or Los Feliz, if you would, Steve Surpass. Steve is with us. Hi, Steve.
I made it.
Welcome to the party.
Hey, guys.
And our last writer is who wrote Clara and Sarah and the Talking Bear, which is set in 90012 DTLA downtown. She's a graduate of Stanford and UCLA. Her play, The Spanish Prayer Book, ran for 2 months at the Road Theater Company in 2019. She's also been produced at the Chameleon Theater Circle, the Blank Theater, and the Dayton Playhouse, among others. She's a recipient of the 2020 New American Voices Award and is a 3-time O'Neill Conference semifinalist. She has productions scheduled at Playhouse Creatures in New York, Playhouse on the Square, and the Hudson Showcase Theater, and has been published for her prose and her poetry. Coming in from Westwood, 90024, here is Angela J. Davis. Hi, Angela. Welcome everybody. You all are here. It's good to see you all again, all in the same room. We're going to start off with some general questions that I would love for each of you to answer. And then following those questions, if you guys have any questions for your fellow writers, we'd love to hear it. And then we're going to open it up to everybody to ask questions. So the first question, which always comes up for us, is our origin story. And we'll start with Angela, actually, which is, how did you come up with the idea for your play? And were there any, it's 2 parts, were there any true inspirations for it? And you're muted, Angela. There you go.
So all of the characters in my play are based on historic figures. Clara Shortridge Foltz was the first female lawyer of the West, and also the person who invented the whole concept of the public defender system. And Father Junipero Serra, I think, is probably a name recognizable to everyone in California. Arctodus is also a true historical figure and is based upon a giant prehistoric bear. So they're all based upon true historic figures. And although I took some liberties with Father Junipero Serra and Clara Shortridge Foltz, I did my best to channel the true voice of the bear. In all seriousness, when Antaeus put out the call for plays based in Los Angeles, it was right around the time of a lot of social demonstration, including taking a very serious look at the statues that live among us. And I was fascinated by that idea and by the toppling of the statue of Father Junipero Serra, which is rich with meaning for so many of us who are familiar with that story. And at the same time, there was a comet circling the heavens, wonderfully named the Neowise comet. And so I just imagined, what if the comet were to awaken three of the most important statues or in our midst, and what if they started to talk to each other?
Did you have a decision process in coming up with these three characters? Were there other statues around LA that you were considering, or was it clear in your mind, these were the guys I'm going with?
You know, I'm kind of fascinated by the La Brea tar pits, and it's in a way, LA, as compared to other cities in this country, seems to not have a lot of history, or at least not as long a history as, say, New York or Philadelphia or DC. But on the other hand, there's this huge reservoir of prehistoric creatures right smack in the middle of the city. And so that was something that fascinated me.
Thanks. Same question to Steve. Steve, how did you come up with the idea for your play, and was there any truth behind it?
Mine's a bit of a story, because I first approached the deadline to the artistic team with actually a different kind of idea, which they liked, but then they had said, this has 12 characters in it. I don't know that we can squeeze this into what we're trying to do. So they're like, you know, can you rethink it, or think about what you're doing here, and, you know, thinking kind of the same zip codes that you were thinking of. And my inspiration shifted to salvage, which was part of what I worked during the day with people with vision loss. And I had heard in one of the programs that I work with that they were doing an alumni meeting on Zoom with a couple of the people in that program. And these friends, male and female friends who hadn't talked to each other in 4 years since they had started the program, just were so connected and went right back into knowing each other and everything. And they know full well, because the term in the disability community is called access intimacy. And I thought, like what would that look like? It was a what if of what would that look like if we were telling the story of two people with vision loss, and how they sort of came back together, how that worked out. It really just fascinated me. And then adding the oral part of it, the audio part of it, I had bought a car at the beginning of the pandemic that needed a lot of work, and it became my project. And I began to know the junkyards in Sun Valley very well. So between those two things, I needed someplace active to put our two characters, and that's kind of the germ of the story. Yeah.
Great. Did you, was there any thing remaining from your original idea that you pitched, or is it a completely new thought?
It ended up being a completely new thought, but kind of the same region. Kind of, I was in La Cañada, then I went to Silmar in my head, and then I was in Sun Valley. So I was thinking kind of that upper valley kind of area where, you know, maybe some of us go to infrequently, but, you know, there's so many things going on that connect to the city at large. It was a least obvious choice that delivered a lot to me, and it was fun to think about. You know, it's fun to develop.
You kept it local. You stayed up there in the North Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. Deb, same question to you. What was your initial idea? How did you come up with it? And were there any true inspirations for it?
Yeah, I think a lot of my work involves characters who have a real awakening, who have a big shift and kind of wake up out of different types of sleepwalking that we tend to do in our lives. And I had a friend over the summer who went to a protest and afterwards, days later, was questioned at her home by the FBI. And it was interesting because the questions were very probing and kind of trying to lead her. And it was upsetting to her because she wasn't a radical, highly political person prior to this, but that certainly made her feel compelled to become more involved. And it started to make me ask the question, how could someone be radicalized by how they're treated within a certain system? And, you know, certainly with everything that's been going on the past few years, this year, I think it's more important than ever to be awake, to really pay attention as the helicopters circle
Yeah,
over my
clearly
house.
the FBI is listening to you.
Yeah.
Right now.
And when I first moved to LA from New York, I was working freelance for a while as a personal organizer. So people would hire me to come into their home or their office or wherever and just get them organized. And I helped this older woman who was in one of those amazing high-rise buildings in Westwood. And it really reminded me of the Upper East Side and the Upper West Side, but especially the Upper East Side and the very insular world that some people live in. And you think, well, these are big cities and these are cosmopolitan people with a lot of money. And it's like, her world was very small. And she was in her 80s and she talked about having wanted to travel her whole life. And I don't mean travel internationally, I mean outside of California. And she'd never done it. And I thought, oh, you know, that's so interesting. And so I sort of conflated those ideas. And what if you were brave enough to sort of take on that kind of shift when you're older, and what are the stakes when you do? So that was inspiration.
That's great. And feel free to not answer this question. How's that for a setup? Was there anything from your friend's experience that you put directly in certain questions that were asked, how your friend responded that made it into your story? Or did you just take the idea and go from there?
Well, I took the idea, I did a lot of research. You can get a lot of transcripts of actual interviews online that are, some elements are redacted, sometimes they're not. But mostly I was trying to understand and hear how they ask the questions they do, because I've never been in that situation yet. And so just really paying attention to, and it's you know, not rocket science, it's how we're led. It's mentalists doing these shows where we give the answer, they magically know the answer. Well, they've led us to say that answer. And so I think that there's a real skill in doing that. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. So some of it I did take from her specific experience. And I spoke to another couple of other people who were in the similar situation. And then just seeing the kinds of questions they ask and understanding the kind of information they're really after. And a lot of the questions they ask, they know the answers to, and, you know, all those different interrogation elements, which is amazing. So yes, I will say, yes, there are some lines that were taken exactly, and I'm not going to tell you which ones they were.
Good. Okay, Nana. So tell us the true inspiration behind your play.
It happened to me. I plucked a lemon in a Santa Monica alleyway. The tree was hanging over the alleyway, but to be honest, I don't really think I was concerned about whether or not it was right or wrong. I just was like, I need a lemon, and that's all that matters. So I plucked it. I was caught on CCTV, and I was a repeat offender, which I totally admit to. And I was brought to food court, Flora and Fauna Court by the Santa Monica Flora and Fauna Association, which is, I mean, they are a lovely group of people. Some of them might be listening. So. But yeah, just, I mean, this house was insane. It was so cool. Oh my God, all the soaps and all the, like the bathroom soaps, the hall, just everything was like, it was like a museum to me. So I was kind of excited about court. I mean, I did feel guilty because technically I did steal. So I do think that that is something where I did reflect on it. But I also just found it really fascinating that there is a whole group of people that try to police and monitor the taking of fruits and flowers and nuts and whatever else falls in the flora and fauna genomes or whatever. I was like, wow, like what kind of life is that where you have the time and the energy to do that? I mean, I haven't got my car's oil changed since God was a boy. And like, I feel like that's a huge, big thing, right? And then you have people who are monitoring your stealing of citrus. So yeah, it was very much drawn from my real life experience, but I also think kind of in this hyperbolic, more fun tone than what I experienced, which to me in my head, it was so big, but in person, they were just lovely people. They're like, please don't do that. And I was like, you know what, you're right, I shouldn't. And I haven't since, but I'm not gonna commit to never doing it.
So this court is in someone's house? It's not like part of the city system, or is it like?
It's not part of the city system. It's kind of like a community, like a neighborhood watch kind of thing. Though the time that I was tried was in this huge house. I don't know if it's always held at that house. There was one person for whom it was like the third time he'd been to food court or like the flora and fauna court. But I didn't end up talking to him that much. But we're actually friends on Facebook now, so I guess I could ask him. But this house it took up the whole block. I remember trying to enter it, and it was like I was entering the solarium and not the actual proper house. So like somebody directed me and was like, "No, you need to enter the house, the main entrance." And I was like, "What? I have to go around the corner to enter this house? Like what?" So it was, wow. Yeah, it was an experience.
Well, like the saying goes, when life gives you lemons, lawyer up, right? I'll get to you in a second, Kari, but I'm working backwards. So I'll talk about, I'll ask myself the question, and the idea for annexing the Palisades came from the true story. This place exists, and it was, I first discovered it about 4 or 5 years ago, before the 2016 election. I was like, Nazis in America, that's crazy. And I knew a little about, Nazis bubbling up over time, but I didn't realize that, they were so passionate before World War I and did not want to enter the war because of Germany. So I learned about this couple. They're very real. The woodcarver is, I made him up, although he could exist. I'm sure they had work done on their banister, their balustrade. But yeah, they lived there. They got busted the day after Pearl Harbor, and but they continued to live there for another 2 years until they sold the place. So it was real fascinating, and it still exists. It's very hard to get to now, but the city officially closed it off. They should turn it into a museum. They should really rebuild it and make it not a pro-Nazi museum, but show that it goes on. This stuff happens. But on to you, Kari. What was the idea? How did you come up with the idea for your play, and were there true inspirations?
See, about a year or so ago, I had read a book called Bright Boulevard, Bold Dreams by an author named Donald Bogle, who's a film historian who concentrates on Black entertainers. And in this book, it follows Black Hollywood from the 1920s on through about the late 50s, early 60s, and the decline of Central Avenue. How important it was at one point in the Sugar Hill area, which is a little further west, but how that was the hub of the Black entertainment world. But the book didn't just focus on actors or directors. It had plenty of that, but it also focused on newspapermen. It focused on gossip columnists. It focused on maids and butlers who were also celebrities in their own right for being staff of white Hollywood celebrities. So it was this whole ecosystem of restaurateurs, hoteliers, nightclubs, regular people, celebrities. And, basically I'm of the opinion that some stories, some things shouldn't be forgotten unless they be repeated. And if they're going to be repeated, you should know that this isn't the first time that this type of thing has happened. So part of my mission as a writer is to tell the stories of my people, whether it's the play itself, whether it's a character in that play and what they're dealing with, so on and so forth. So after reading this novel, not novel, but this book, I remembered it and I was like, it fascinated me. And I've been down Central Avenue many a time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on South Central. This is my shot. So I came up with the story and it centered it around Central Avenue, but Central Avenue's decline. Because I think, people know about the heyday, when all the white celebrities, Clark Gables and Ava Gardners and Frank Sinatra's would come down to Central Avenue and hang out at the Dunbar Hotel. They would hang out at the Club Alabama. They would hang out at other jazz clubs up and down Central Avenue. But once integration happened and the people in the neighborhood started to be able to go outward into Hollywood, into West LA, into the Valley, things became depressed, economically depressed. People weren't making the same money. So I said, well, I want to tell that story. And so within that story, I was able to come up with those characters and just tell a regular story about people, about a man and a woman, a marriage, and the strains of that itself, but then also add in the racial dynamics of that era and how integration actually hurt the community, but how we are also connected to struggle in other states. Like the South is like ground zero, right? If you talk about race in America, everybody will talk about Alabama and Mississippi for good reason, Louisiana, Georgia, all the South. But it wasn't just the South, it was everywhere. There were places in New York that I wouldn't be able to walk in the front door if I could get in at all. There were places in Seattle, there were places in LA. And the LAPD is notorious, and it's been notorious since the 30s, especially for black people. As corrupt as it was even, there's a saying in the black community, if white people have a cold, black people got a flu. And that's it. So that's where my story came from, the genesis of it.
That's great. Your, character comes back from Europe as a writer, and it's a great. I love it that he's in Europe because it's a different world, race-wise, for compared to here. Did you know right away he was going to be a writer? Is that how you wanted to attack it, or keep it in the arts? Or okay, so
I knew he would be a writer because I wanted to also tell that part of it. Because there was a lot of black expatriates who were artists. They were painters, they were dancers, they were singers, they were writers, and they couldn't get opportunity here, and they went over to Europe, where they were more respected as people, as performers, where they would get paid fairly, where they could live in peace, live as a human being. And so they went over there. Now, sometimes they would come back. Oftentimes they would come back because there was a struggle going on here that they felt they needed to be a part of, actively a part of, and not separated from it and living in Europe while all of it was going on. But there were many who didn't come back and they stayed over there. So I knew he was going to be a writer. I knew he was going to be in Paris, and I knew I wanted that story of him having gone and coming back to tell that dynamic of the struggle for civil rights, but also how that impacted his personal life with his marriage.
Great. I'm going to stay with you on this because we're moving on to our next question, which is, these are the zip code plays about specific zip codes in Los Angeles. How'd you pick this particular one? Why? I mean, you went into it a little bit about why it's important to your story, but why here? Why this exact zip code?
Because like I said, it was the hub of Black life in the time period I wanted to set the story in. I knew I wanted to be a period piece. With everything that's going on now, what we've seen over the last 7 to 8 months, or what I like to say, what white people have seen over the last 7 to 8 months, that my people have already known this is going on. This is nothing new. This is not anything that surprised us. George Floyd, there's many George Floyds. You just didn't hear about it, or they just didn't care. So to me, I wanted to set it in the 50s because I wanted people to see this has a genesis. And if I set it in the 50s, I could set it back in the 1800s. Like, this story is constant. So it had to be in South Central because that was the hub at that time, even as depressed as it had become by the late 50s. At that time, Central Avenue was still it.
and the characters had experienced it when it was in its prime. So it wasn't a 2 generations out. They lived it. They could say, "I saw it."
Exactly. Those characters knew what it used to be. They knew that hotel housed Duke Ellington and all the big celebrities who were coming to town. The Dunbar Hotel was that place. The restaurant at the Dunbar Hotel was one of the hubs of nightlife. The Alabama, which is directly next door in the same building, was one of the biggest nightclubs in LA. Like I said, all the white Hollywood celebrities would come to the Alabama, And then also, because it's a story and it's fiction and I'm a writer, I added the Moonglow, just to have a fictional place that could be worked into the plot of the storyline. But the Moonglow even is a real place, but it was in Buffalo, New York, where I'm originally from. My aunt, my grandmother, and another grandmother worked at the Moonglow as barmaids. So I always like to incorporate a little of my personal history too, if possible.
Great, very good, thanks. I'll take the question next. Why did annexing the Palisades take place in that zip code? And for 2 reasons. The main one, that's where that house is. It's dilapidated, it's in the hills, and the Palisades in Rustic Canyon. That's the zip code. But on another level, this is a couple who is very wealthy. They did settle there on purpose. They picked it for the space, and I wanted to show what goes on behind closed doors. We all have assumptions of people who, have a good amount of money. And in Los Angeles, especially, you make assumptions about a lot of rich people here and the causes they support. And it's just not always the case. You don't know. When I was doing my research, one historian said about the Stevens couple, it says they may have been Nazis, but they had excellent taste. And that really resonates with me. And they did. They got Frank Lloyd Wright to do some of the design work, and they wound up throwing out his blueprints and going with other people. That's my take on that one. So Nana, obviously this happened to you, and this was in your zip code here.
Yeah, scene of the crime.
Could you see it taking place anywhere else? I mean, does this exist anywhere else?
I don't know. I lived in North Hollywood, in like the not fancy, very fecal matter riddled part of North Hollywood, where you have to watch every step you take, like near the Denny's.
Sure.
For those who know North Hollywood, near the Church of Scientology, Denny's, weird intersection. So it's really weird to be in Santa Monica, where it was just so pristine. And there were no lemons to steal, as far as I knew, in North Hollywood. And so I think that for me, Santa Monica feels not like just a separate zip code, but a whole other LA.
So you were living in North Hollywood at the time, or were you in Santa Monica?
No, I in terms of just answering your question about could it take place in another zip code, I've lived in LA for 5 years. I've lived in 4 or 5 different zip codes, but Santa Monica by far is the most pristine and feels the most removed from the realities of the other zip codes. And I've never seen, I think, so much wealth and so much beauty just in terms of how people manage their lawns, and they have lawns, and it's just a whole other way of life that feels very removed from the other lives I've led in LA as a resident and citizen.
Thanks. Deb, same question to you. Why here? We know why now. Obviously, it's very pressing play that you wrote, but why this neighborhood?
I think once I really thought about the apartment dwelling, the high-rise unit bubble as a part of what this person has to try to reach beyond. It made me think of the woman that I had worked for in Westwood, and the FBI headquarters in Los Angeles is in Westwood. And so that whole, and UCLA, just college campus in general, sort of very active in terms of protests and organized events and inclusion, and everyone's welcome to come and meet at this corner for our march across these few blocks or whatever. So it felt like that was the right place to set it.
Yeah, I knew that. I actually met an FBI agent who told me about working in Westwood. I'd forgotten this. And I was like, a small talk, what do you do there? He's like, I can't tell you.
I'd have to kill you.
He left the ellipses on there. It was dangling. He didn't say it, but I knew.
You
I
know.
knew. Yeah. Steve, same question for you. Why Sun Valley?
You know, that's where it has this car culture. It's a community that came up, you know, in earlier part of last century, just as I've researched it lightly, just as a bedroom community. But I've been up there personally, look at used car lots, and I've been to the junkyards where you go and you literally pull parts off of cars yourself. And I matched that with my two heroes, both of who are, you know, one has, I'm not going to be able to say it, but RP, and then one has macular degeneration. And usually in social services in this area, a lot of people who have successfully gone through programs in a center like that end up being volunteers to give back because they know the way, and it's about eliminating barriers to living. And I thought, well, you know, we could tell this story, say, in South Silver Lake, or it's now called Virgil Village, where a lot of those services are for blind people and for people with vision loss. And, you know, Billy shows up at Martha's apartment to help, but that just felt kind of static. And so I chose Martha to have this beyond of wanting to drive one more time, which all of us, you know, are going to have one last time when we can drive, because we'll have a disability that selects us out of that privilege. And it will happen to 25 million baby boomers of the next 30 years. So vision loss and vision is a big thing. And so I wanted to kind of give it an adventure to that. And that's how we got to Sun Valley.
I love that she's riding it out until her license expires. She's like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep driving. And what are they going to do? It's very, you know, it's hard to take keys away from somebody, no matter what the cause.
Yeah.
Oh, I muted myself. Angela, same question to you.
So the 90012 zip code is the former home of the statue of Junipero Serra, which was right in front of the Union Station, the primary train station for Los Angeles. It's also the home of the Clara Shortridge Foltz Courthouse. But also beyond that, I think, like the other writers, it's not just this literal connection. There's also an ambience and a setting that really felt like what I was trying to do with the play, and specifically 90012 is Civic Center. It's home to the courthouses and the governmental buildings. The FBI headquarters is kind of an outlier, being based in Westwood. But also amidst these government buildings and obviously concentrations of wealth that are reflected in all the office towers in Bunker Hill and around 90012, there are rows and rows and rows of homeless encampments. And you really see, whether you want to or not, the wealth disparity and the reality that there are a lot of people living on the street when you walk down the streets of 90012.
Yeah, you've got people on the street directly underneath like Michelin-starred restaurants. It's really a wide range. One thing I would like to point out that I wouldn't necessarily make it unique to your zip code you picked, but certainly rooftop bars downtown. They're all over LA, of course, but when you moved to that location, went to a rooftop bar, I'm like, that is very downtown. Did you have one in mind when you were writing, or did you?
You know, I've been asked that more than once, and a few listeners have suggested and nominated particular bars. To be honest, I didn't have a particular bar in mind, and one of the other thoughts was that Arcturus didn't either. I mean, he just kind of stepped on top of a building and found what was there.
Yeah, he wasn't going through his Yelp guide or anything. So I have one final question for all of us, and then we get a chance to ask each other questions if there's anything about anyone's play. And then we're going to open it up to the group. So first off, we'll go back to Kari. The last question is, how did you approach writing this radio play differently from writing for the stage?
I didn't really. You know, it's a story, beginning, middle, end. Do things make sense? Do things tie together? Are things woven in a nuanced way and not heavy-handed? Same as any other thing I write. The thing that I did do that was different was I made room for directions for audio effects. So within the play, putting, okay, this sound here, or this set of sounds here. But outside of that, it was you know, it's just writing and making sure you tell the story in a way that makes sense and that's clear.
I was really taken by your one thing that you did differently that I did not take advantage of is you can tell a story just using audio differently than watching it on stage, and specifically the moments of violence and the moments of intimacy, the kissing and the violence. It sounded very, very believable because we have that opportunity. But looking at it on stage, we're going to be like, oh, are they napping, the marking the hits, and like what's that kind of stuff? And so I felt that was distinct for radio. I thought that you really were able to capture that in a way that we couldn't see on stage.
Jeff Gardner.
Jeff is the man. I'll answer this one next. And similarly, looking back, if I have any regret to my play, and I don't necessarily, but we all do, all writers, but instantly as soon as it's done, have tons of changes. But I would have done more to take it outside of the environment. I did know going into it that I was going to use the radio as more of a practical. So it could be, we could hear from it, then we would get to hear the Hitler speech, and then we could, you know, take it through time as the play ends. We jump ahead 30 years. So I knew that I was going to use that in a way that you can get on stage, but it's going to sound different in your ears. But Nana, the same question to you. How did you approach this any differently than other plays?
Yeah, for me, it was really different in that I think Antaeus, you know, namely Bill and Kitty, had to walk me through really not leaning on directions, on stage directions. So I had to figure out what was going to be more oral or auditory and how to really use the medium. And that changed a lot of things for me in terms of pacing and how things are played out, where they're a little bit more action oriented because there's no visual cues. So that changed things. And then I would also say that some parts of it became more nuanced and more hyperbolic. One, to explain, you know, without the, you know, the visual element, but two, also because there were things that I felt I chose to make it a 10 to 15 minute piece, but I think that there's not necessarily the same amount of room to let things breathe and to make them play out a little bit and sit with them in 15 minutes as there might be in a full length piece. So I definitely took to, I think it was a real exercise for me to think, okay, what can we achieve? What is taking on too much trouble when you're trying to explain all the dynamics that are going on? So the big thing for me, though, was not using the stage directions or having any stage directions as my crutch or kind of narrator for the audience.
Yeah, that's a good point. You got visual, your visual cues are all out there. You got to rewire your brain. Thanks. Deb, same question to you.
Yeah, I was really, that's one reason I really threw my hat into the ring for this, because I was really interested in the idea of the oral elements being really fundamental to the storytelling. You know, how do you craft the story? How do you reveal the story in a way that the audience has to listen, really listen, and work it out for themselves, work out what the different environments are. There's not any interstitial explanation. It's a dossier. It's just for my piece, it was just a sequence of audio elements, tapes, that were this FBI file for this woman. And, you know, we're being surveyed all the time. I mean, a few weeks ago, I mentioned in conversation where my phone was in the room, but off, about new house numbers for the house. You know, what you hammer into the side of your house to tell the mailman where to deliver. And the next day I had ads you know, it's happening all over, and it's not just cameras on street corners or intersections. We are being recorded, and you know, ways that is so convenient, and ways that it's really terrifying, and how everyone, not just retailers, are using this data, and how it can be used to build a case any way that they want it to. So I thought that was a really fascinating way to tell a story. Also, I really like being behind as a listener or an audience member. I like having to really lean forward and figure it out. So I wanted to sort of take advantage of that as well.
I also like that you got to play with audio in different ways. I mean, yes, it's all stuff that has been recorded, but we're dealing with three different things. You got like live conversations. Yes, it's recorded, but you have phone calls. You have taped testimony sort of thing. So you've got like, you're using audio in different ways, which was
and then
very
refreshing. Alexa comes in an unexpected way. One of the characters you wouldn't expect sort of brings that to the fore. Also, the fact that there's you hear someone's phone recording being recorded just from being in the same space, but then later you have both sides of the conversation being recorded. So it's more a wiretapping situation. So how it kind of progresses and hopefully raises the stakes in terms of the intimacy that these recordings are being achieved.
Great.
But
Thanks.
yeah, and also a shout out to Jeff Gardner, who really had some challenges, you know, just trying to layer all that in, because it's complicated, because you don't want to confuse people, but it's how do you bring them along and paint these scenes just with those audio cues, and so many of them are really subtle. So yeah, tip of the hat to Jeff for sure.
Yeah, and added shout out to Jeff. I haven't done the math, but I imagine he spent more time working on our individual plays than we all spent on our own individual plays. Like, I mean, I don't know your process, and I spent a lot of time writing it, but he went to work.
Yeah, I just whipped mine out in like 5 minutes, so I'm sure he really
When's the deadline?
Yeah.
All right, let me do something, whatever. Not true, everybody, not true. Steve, we'd love to know how you approach it differently if you did.
Yeah, I would say not too much on the outset, because having not written for this medium before, it's an invitation to overthink it if you don't sort of just stick with your dream of the story and the dimension and find a place where there's a possibility of sound and all of that we each found. So I was glad to hit upon the junkyard as a setting, because, it's a bunch of cars that, you bump up against anything and it's falling apart, and there's metal, grinding metal, and this, that, and the other. But what we put in it is this kind of intimate scene where they keep walking to the back of this very quiet lot, because if there's not that many people there, you're in a graveyard actually of dead cars. And the noise is only sort of what you push or pull upon the situation. And so we gave them a little of that to do. And we went over when they were having interactions, and, for touching on the eliminating barriers part of it, we have the touch and drag of the cane that Martha arrives with. And there was a lot of exteriors. At first they were like, exteriors are hard. I'm like, oh, did we do too much, But it all worked out. I mean, they worked some magic at the end, the actors and Jeff, with, I don't want to give it away, but there's some special, audio at the end of the piece that the actors deliver. And so does Jeff, our audio producer. And, at those right times, there's a lot of noise banging on cars, so.
And good, don't give it away. I'll give it away. No, I'm kidding. No, I wouldn't do that. One added thing that I love is, obviously this probably didn't affect your process of writing, but your two characters are in the same situation that we are as the audience. We're listening. We have no visual point of reference. I'm sure they're not as blind as we are at that point, but it was great for us to really be in their shoes by not seeing what's going on.
Yeah, that's actually a good comment. I mean, that's to hear, because I think we want you to sort of disappear with them, hopefully, as you listen to this piece. It was written in 4 sections that maybe have continuous action or maybe just a minute or two where they're getting from being on the pavement into a junk car to talk, have another moment and such. And so it keeps going deeper and becomes smaller, and they keep talking about the light, which affects blind people so much, or and people with vision loss, how big the light is, how small the light is. Martha says to Billy at one point, "You made the light small for me, and I really appreciate that." And you get lost in these things they remember together. And I like that it's done in this big place and not in someone's apartment. You can say things when you're sort of out in the world talking to a friend or talking to a confidant that you don't when you're just in someone's living room sometimes. So.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Angela, same question to you. Did you approach this differently than your other plays?
Somewhat. I had been a huge fan of Jeff Gardner previously, and of his work with LA Theater Works in particular. And also I'd been a fan of BBC Radio 4, and I just kind of love radio plays. And I think there is, even though radio obviously narrows the possibility because it eliminates the visual element, it also, I think, makes everything possible, right? Whereas you have budget constraints and other concerns if you're writing a theatrical piece that's going to take place in Versailles or in outer space, for that matter. With radio, the considerations or the concerns about that don't exist. And I really think you can do almost anything with the magic of the radio format, especially when you have somebody like Jeff Gardner doing it. So if anything, I think it freed me a little bit to not worry about execution so much, and to not worry about practicalities that you sometimes worry about when you're writing for the conventional stage.
Great. We are starting to get some questions in the chat box, which is great. Alice will feed some to us in a minute. But beforehand, I want to give all of you guys a chance to ask any of your fellow writers up here any questions about their pieces, their process, their life, something that I haven't thought about covering yet. Jump in, anybody. Anyone have a question for anybody else?
I have a question. This is for anyone. Do you see a full-length version of your play?
That's good question. I honestly haven't thought of it. I felt that mine was structured to be this length, with a plot twist like 10-15 minutes in. So I don't see this maintaining itself, but there's possibilities.
I see the characters could have a full-length play. I don't imagine this taking this and just putting it in a full-length. You mean an audio play, full-length audio play?
No, a full-length
production.
Stage play.
Yes.
No, I don't know. Possibly. I mean, yeah, you could, those characters. Yeah, sure. What about you?
Yes.
You do.
Definitely.
Are you working on that now?
Not yet.
Well, you better get going.
It has to be in order. There's other things first. But definitely, I could see it. I have it in my mind what happens next and what happens in that first act to, expand that as well.
Nice. Well, maybe Antaeus will do a serialized audio that for all of our plays that we'll have like the chapter 2, chapter 12, chapter 24. You see where I'm going with this? Like
in that case, yes, I have a lot more chapters.
Yes, me too. I have so many more ideas. Yes.
Those Nazis just won't go away.
I do want to say a shout out to the directors and the actors, the casting, because I know working with my director, Caroline Rattray, was invaluable, just super, super helpful in so many ways. And I feel like the actors really brought it to life, in that wonderfully unexpected way that happens in our world. So shout out.
Yes, indeed. Angela, you were about to say something about?
It's so funny because I was planning on asking Nana if she had ever been a plucker. And then I was thinking, no, I don't want to ask her that because I don't want to embarrass her or put her on the spot. But she answered it herself already with her wonderful story. And so I'm just kind of curious, have the fauna and flora court officials in Santa Monica heard your play?
I don't know. I don't know them really all that personally, so I didn't reach out to share. My play doesn't always put them in the best light, and it's hyperbolic, so I didn't. But if they see it, they see it. If they're with us right now, Angela, welcome. Yes, thank you for being the inspiration behind this story. You are my muse.
Yeah. Well, you put them in a very nice light when you told about the true fauna.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, I do think this play, even amidst its, hyperbole and comedy, my whole thing was I didn't want to paint, any one side as right, wrong, good, or bad. I wanted everyone to have some accountability, some awareness, and then some lack of awareness too, like the kind of ways we justify our own behaviors but see problems with it in other people and the blind spots we have. So I'm hoping I achieved that. But yeah, I really like to operate in the gray space, and to also, just build upon that with Kari's question. I actually would really love to see a full-length version of this because of what Alex had raised earlier about just, how it was to tell this story in the short time and via radio. There were lots of things from a nuanced standpoint that I personally experienced as well, where, part of it was I was really excited about court once I got there because this house was so huge. And if I'm being totally honest, I thought about stealing a soap from the bathroom. So I guess it's once a stealer, always a stealer. And then that made me think a lot about my own values. It's like, well, I'm not hurting anybody, but it's still wrong, right? And I'm like, well, it's not stealing a car. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm justifying this. So just things like that where basically what I'm saying is don't ever have me over to your house is what I'm telling everybody here. But
that's what I got out of that.
It was just really easy for me to say like, oh, these wealthy, rich people who don't have anything better to do with their time. Well, they're looking out for their community. And they were actually really lovely people who fed me and just said, please don't do it again.
And had you into their home. That's one thing I think is so interesting was like, come into our home so we can have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like an eyes wide shut kind of situation. It was just like,
no, there was no massive orgy, which I think is in Eyes Wide Shut. No, nothing like that. Nothing like that.
Because see, that could be after intermission. Then there's like the play.
That's episode 7 of Plucker.
Yeah, there you go.
Things at that point. Yeah.
Nina, your play is very, very funny, and I wanted to dovetail and ask. You portray part of the proceedings of this court. Was the actual court itself funny itself? Like, are you standing there trying to like hold a straight face while you're in flora, fruit and fauna court? Or?
I think I was a little deer in the headlights. They do have you stand. You can sit if you want, but I was like, this is, I out of respect, and I'm a good Asian girl most of the time, so yeah, I'm gonna stand. But it's like 3rd or 4th generation Santa Monicans, and they're all, I don't want to sound ageist, but they all appear to be like retired and in their 70s. So things just move slower. And I tend to talk really fast. So, and also if I'm nervous, I just babble. I'm just really verbose. I can't handle silence. It just doesn't work for me. So they would say something really slowly, and I would just be like, get to the punchline, get to the verb. What did I do? That kind of thing. But ultimately it was, I think, them just wanting to say, look, we share a community and we all have to be respectful. And I think for me, it was, oh, maybe I have a different take of this community, but I did join this community. This community has me, and I want to abide by the greater good. For me, community is, my mom and dad grew up in poverty in India, and it was very much like at the end of the day, everyone pulls their money together, and then you sit on top of a roof after you've bought food, and everybody just eats together. Everybody sleeps on the roof because it's so friggin' hot. So my sense of community is like, oh, you have a lemon, take a lemon, whatever. Like, it's all good. But I might just be finding a way to condone my klepto habits. I don't know.
Does anyone else up here have a question for anybody else before we let Alice put us in? Yeah, Steve.
Well, Alex, you've hosted, so I wanted to ask one more about your piece, which is amazing. And as people have said, chilling. it ends with a great audio, I'm going to call it a newsreel, that takes us so many emotional places. And I wanted to ask, how did that come together? Because it's a feat of writing, production, direction, and anything you want to say about that? It's just such a magnificent ending.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to jump forward to the present from the play set in 1939. I jumped forward for a couple of reasons. One, to see how this building has fallen into disrepair and people don't know what its use is. And so something that Kari said earlier is, you know, people don't learn about the history, it's going to go away, and we're doomed to repeat it. And that's the second part, we're doomed to repeat it. It ends right as Trump takes, so the last newsreel is Trump is president. It's not about him, but he's just become president. And there's going to be a resurgence. We all know, because we have the benefit being 4 years in the future, we know what happens during the past 4 years when it comes to neo-Nazis and the alt-right. So I wanted to sort of plant that, like, guess what, folks? We're not too far away.
Thank you. I mean, it's an interesting voyage you do at the end there from the setting that you take there. So.
Thanks. I actually took it one step further, and during the process, Bill wisely, when he was giving notes, suggested a cut, which I did. It wasn't important to the story, but the newsreel went one further, and it said, according to it gave a stat that according to the Anti-Defamation League, there are currently like 2,000 hate groups in Los Angeles County today. 2,000, which is a chilling stat and very interesting, but again, it took us out of the story, so we wisely cut that. But that's where it was ending.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Thanks.
I'm going to jump in with a couple of our audience questions.
Great, thanks, Alice.
And this can be for anyone who wants to answer, but it's just because not everyone in our audience may know. Talk a little bit about what the Playwright is, what the Playwrights Lab is, how you're involved with it, if you participate every week, how that informed this process, anything you'd like to share about the lab.
I'll jump in first because I was recently on the Playwrights Panel, which is 3 playwrights that sort of supervise some of the process. So we meet once a week, every week, and it's been a little different in pandemic times, but we still meet, and we just do it online. Playwrights present 4 different playwrights, or actually 3 now during pandemic era, present up to 20 minutes of their play. It's usually a cold read by these fantastic actors in lab, or at least very little advance notice. And after 20 minutes of it, there's a feedback session where we discuss parts that we really enjoyed, parts that we bumped on, got confused about, and the playwright gets to ask some questions. So for me personally, I'm going to open it up to everyone else. It's very beneficial as part of your development process to bring in 20 minutes of play, and regardless of how polished it is, and hear it performed the best it can be by actors who are really, really good.
It's really great. And sometimes the pages, you've just finished them 45 minutes before the lab starts. So there's a real immediate response, which is great. And it's also just inspiring to participate, hearing what other people are working on, and just feeling the brave steps that everyone's taking, especially this year, I think, when it's been so challenging to envision what's going to happen next and when it's going to happen. And so it's just a source of real inspiration, and it's a really supportive, professional, warm community. You know, there's not a sense of competition. There's a sense of support that I've found that's really, really helpful and invaluable, especially in this town.
Yeah, I would just echo what Deb said there at the end, because that's exactly what I was thinking in terms of the community with Antaeus, and maybe in its entirety in theater, but really speaking to Antaeus, is that I think it's not a sense of competition. It's not a place where I think it's a zero-sum game. Oftentimes when I've written for television or television shows, because there's money involved and prestige or status or whatever, I think a lot of things can play into the, me versus her or whatever kind of dynamic. I genuinely feel like Antaeus feels like a family. It's a community. It's supportive. It's honest. So it feels in a lot of ways like what I would imagine a functional family would be like. I don't have a lot of personal experience with that, but it's what I think a functional family looks like.
I would just add that I'm incredibly grateful that the lab kept going during the pandemic. And I mean, a lot of us had shows that were canceled, and I mean, a lot of actors really suffered during the pandemic. Hamilton was slated to open in Los Angeles after months of rehearsal. And obviously that didn't happen. That's just one example, but there were many smaller productions and many things that were just canceled and went dark, and the lab kept going. And I was really grateful to have that community of actors and writers since March, notwithstanding the pandemic. And it was really nice to kind of check in with them and hear new work, hear the actors get an acting workout. And what frequently happened after the lab met during the pandemic is we would hang out with each other online and just talk and connect. And it was really valuable to have that.
Even before in pre-pandemic times, it's a true symbiotic relationship. You've got writers who need to write, you've got actors who need to act. And it's a chance for all of us to work our muscles out. And it's as everyone's been saying, there's no end competition to it. Yes, the theater does like to work with lab writers and, the lab results reading series, and of course the Zip Code plays now, but that's not the goal of the writers. The goals are to create their pieces and to do it the best way they can and to continue to grow.
I have a question here that's a particular question for Kari, and it comes from Kiki Gendler. And she was saying she knows that you've done a lot of writing for TV and film in addition to plays, and was wondering how theater has fit into that, if it was before, during, after, or, how that all fits in together for you and what inspired it.
Theater I came to after film and TV stuff. I got my MFA in film from Columbia. While I was there, I took a playwriting class with a man named Romulus Lenny.
Oh.
Great dude. However, when I was there, I didn't know. I knew he had a play on Broadway. And in my young mind, he had a play on Broadway. Like, that was it, and cool, whatever. I was there to make movies, so that didn't register with me. I had trouble writing plays at that time. Our final project was supposed to be a one-act play, and being in film, all I would hear all day is show, don't tell, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. I go to his class, everybody's bringing in pages. All anybody does is talk. And they talk in certain locales, and that's it. Like, no, these 10 scenes are in this one location, and all this talking is going on in this location, or imagine. I just couldn't do it. So I said, Romulus, man, hey, this is kicking my ass. Can I turn in one of my screenplays for my final project, which he was very gracious and allowed me to do. I promised him before I left the earth, I would write a full-length play. Cut to about 2008, 2009, I got laid off from my job at a law firm when the economic downturn hit. I wound up making money at a plasma donation center. I did this for like 2 years. I mean, I worked it like a job. Everybody there worked it like a job, right? You're always there. You see the same people. I was on the donation bed one day, and these characters started talking to me. I wrote it down. It turned into a play called Some Type of Ecstasy, which was the semifinalist for the O'Neill a couple years ago. And so I had ambitions, and I still do, of TV and film, but playwriting kind of has taken a hold of me. I hope I figured out how to, maneuver through the genre and do it in a competent fashion. So TV and film came first, and the playwriting came from life circumstances. But I feel like I've kept my word to Romulus. I told him I would do it. I did it.
That's a great answer. I have a question for Alex, and this is from Arlene, Arlene Vidor, and she was asking about if you knew about the history of Nazis in Glendale in particular, which is of course where the Antaeus Theater is, and if there might be any inspiration for that for future episodes or exploration.
You know, I just read that comment from Arlene. That's fascinating. I had no idea, and it's my own naivete to not think, oh, it's just in the Palisades, and you know, I've learned nothing from my own writing process, Arlene. That's what happened. No, and that's a good place to go. I mean, not to be glib or silly about it, but there could be some sort of "it's a small world after all" look at all the Nazis around Los Angeles situation and see how they come together, or not. Hopefully, yeah. No, I mean, there's a. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of stuff that gets buried for decades and then reemerges because we make the same mistakes over and over again about education mostly, and I'm not assuming blame on non-racists for racist behavior, but saying that, you know, it's going to keep happening. And so, yes, how can I make a story like that relevant today? It's going to be super easy. I'm going to do my research starting tonight. Thank you for that.
And then we have a question from John Walker, and for that, I'm inviting Bill and Kitty back in case they want to weigh in as well. But they were interested in with the constraints of coronavirus and the various constraints on this project, how casting came together for each of your plays. Oh, Kitty, I think you're muted still.
We started by actually meeting with the writers and then the writers and the directors, and Bill and Anna Rose and I came with lists of actors that we were excited about, and then we kind of negotiated, and I think we really landed on wonderful casts in each regard. Bill, you must have more to say than I do.
No, maybe the writers can speak about how they felt it went. I'm happy with. We think we have awesome people, so I was super happy to use the people we did.
I'll jump in. One thing, which is not to get too technical about it, but one thing that we had to eliminate in the casting process is couples who are both actors working together, because the way the recording happened, it takes all the bandwidth to upload and to record live. So you can't have two people in the same house using the same internet. So there were plenty
of the same play. They could be on different plays, but yeah.
That's true. Yes, and in fact, we did do that. Yeah, but for the same play, correct. So that didn't make the casting any worse. It just affected it a little bit. I think we're all happy. I was certainly very happy with my cast.
I mean, maybe people in the audience don't know, how we did it, but Jeff Gardner, who has been mentioned many times here, who's our awesome audio producer, Foley artist, he does everything. He's seriously amazing, a sound designer and a great actor as well, but don't forget that part. He put together a list of equipment, and then including microphones, cords, a little kind of odd little portable booth thing. And we delivered those to each actor's house, left them outside. And then they set them up. Jeff made videos to walk people through how to set this up, how to download the program to the computer that he recorded on. It was not on Zoom. It's a program that doesn't have any visual, so that the audio signal is stronger. And so he worked it all out. Kitty and I were the test patients. We made it through. So
we are the two biggest Luddites in America.
Yeah, so we did it as a test run, and then people recorded so that actors were never in the same room. It's really amazing. They were all at their own homes. Once they finished the recording, they packed the stuff up, put it outside, and someone picked it up. We set it up, disinfected it, and let it sit for a while, and then delivered it to the next people. So everything could be done in a safe manner, and somehow through the magic of audio, it sounds like everyone's in the same room.
I'm just going to say one other thing about what Jeff did is that if you record on Zoom, there's buffering between people talking over each other. So he found a program where he could record different tracks for each actor, and then he could blend them the way you would in a television or film studio's soundstage. It was really extraordinary.
We should also make a shout out to Ellen Mandel, who's a composer who writes amazing music for these things. She wrote a theme, and then she rescored them for each play, depending on the tone and different instrumentation throughout. I also think we need to give a big shout out to Ramon Diocampo, who is our host, and brilliantly works his way through each one of the plays as a personality that we want to return to, because I think in podcasts you come back oftentimes, not just for the great material, but for the winning nature of the host, and we're very pleased to have him.
I'll say that is the end of my questions in the chat, but if anybody else has any questions, you can also, you can chat or you can raise your hand. So I'll leave another moment in case there are any lingering questions. But if there aren't, then I think we can probably begin wrapping up, but I'll hand that over to you, Alex, unless there's anything else, because so far I'm not seeing anything new pop up.
Well, if a question comes in the next minute, we can certainly take it. But I do want to talk a little about what's next. And as part of the Zip Code Plays, the Antaeus Theater has created the Zip Code Plays Tour. So each tour will visit the theater company's favorite landmarks and small businesses that are featured in each zip code of all of our plays, where they all take place. It's going to launch on Tuesday. There's a virtual version of each tour, so you can explore and learn more about all these neighborhoods from the safety of your home. You could also take a driving tour around with it. You could, be safe right now, maybe wait a little on that. But you can do the virtual tour starting Tuesday. So you'll be able to find them on the Zip Code Plays page on the Antaeus website. And the postcards.
Just a thank you, Bill and Alice and Mary, everybody, Kitty, everybody at Antaeus for really, it was such a lift to be able to work on this year. And I really appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
We are very grateful to you writers for giving us your talent. We really appreciate it.
Yes, we are.
Thanks, and thanks to the Playwrights Lab, all of the playwrights in it, the Playwrights Panel, everybody who organizes it. I'm going to forget names if I start ticking them all.
We'll start crying if we start naming them all. I'll just end up in
thank you
a huddle
to,
of tears.
I want to also thank all the supporters, donors, fans that are out there watching the thing tonight. We certainly could not do it without you either. So,
No, thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to all of the playwrights and everyone listening. And I think we'll go ahead and say goodnight. I hope we can see you all back virtually sometime soon, and then soon back at the theater.
Oh, please, I want to give you all a hug, every single one of you.
I know.
All right, good night,
Thank
everybody.
you so much. Stay well, stay healthy.
Good night, everybody.